In the quiet neighborhood of Raleigh, North Carolina, a seemingly perfect marriage turns dark when a woman battling cancer discovers her husband's betrayal. What began as a heart-wrenching fight for survival spirals into a twisted plot of revenge that would leave the town stunned. This is the chilling story of Sharon Michaels, a cancer patient who took matters into her own hands after discovering her husband's infidelity during her most vulnerable time. Sharon Michaels had always been a woman of strength. She had spent years building a life with her husband, Solomon, that others could only dream of. Together, they raised two beautiful teenage children, living in a comfortable home in Raleigh, North Carolina. Sharon had dedicated her life to her family and career, working as an elementary school teacher, shaping young minds with her gentle touch. But life, in all its unpredictability, had other plans for her. In late 2008, Sharon was diagnosed with breast cancer. What followed was an unimaginable descent into a battle for her life. The months after her diagnosis were marked by rounds of chemotherapy that left her weakened, fragile, and worn out. She had surgeries to remove the tumor and the endless rounds of doctor visits to monitor her progress. Her once vibrant, healthy body slowly began to deteriorate as the cancer treatments took their toll. Her hair, once thick and chestnut-colored, fell out in clumps, leaving her staring at her reflection with hollow eyes. Sharon's spirit was battered, but even in her weakest moments, she held on for the sake of her children and Solomon. For years, their marriage had been a pillar of stability in her life. They had celebrated anniversaries, birthdays, and family milestones together, and Sharon thought they were a team, battling through whatever life threw at them. She believed Solomon loved her, that he would be by her side through sickness and health, as they had vowed all those years ago. But as time went on, she began to notice subtle changes in him, things that were easy to overlook at first, but became impossible to ignore as the weeks passed. Solomon was a corporate executive, always busy with work. His late nights and long meetings had never concerned Sharon before. But now, as her health declined and her dependence on him grew, Solomon became distant. It started with missed phone calls during the day, when she needed him the most, then late returns home, where he would claim he had been at the office. Sharon chalked it up to the stress of work and the burden her illness had placed on him. She reassured herself that it was the cancer weighing on both of them. By early 2009, Sharon found herself alone more often than not, the walls of their home feeling colder and more isolating. The man who had once been her rock seemed to be slipping away, and she didn't have the energy to hold on to him. As her chemotherapy intensified, Sharon's body weakened, and so did her ability to ignore the nagging feeling that something was terribly wrong in her marriage. But it wasn't until March 12th, 2009, that the truth hit her in the face. Sharon had never been one to pry into her husband's personal affairs, but on that day, something told her to borrow his phone while he was in the shower. She had noticed it vibrating more frequently, and with a shaking hand, she unlocked it. What she saw shattered her world. There, on the screen, were months of explicit text messages between Solomon and Mandy, their 30-year-old neighbor. Mandy was everything Sharon wasn't at that moment. Healthy, vibrant, strong. She was a fitness instructor, living just a few houses down from them. Someone who had always been polite and cheerful whenever they crossed paths in the neighborhood. The messages revealed that Solomon and Mandy had been having an affair for months, sneaking around while Sharon lay bedridden. The realization crushed Sharon. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow, as she read through the text. The affair wasn't just physical. Solomon shared intimate moments, laughter, and thoughts with Mandy. things that Sharon had once shared with him. It was like reading about a stranger's life, and yet it was her own. She could almost hear his voice in her mind, whispering sweet nothings to Mandy, words that once belonged to her alone. Sharon sat on the edge of the bed, numb. The pain was unlike anything she had ever felt before, not from the cancer, but from the betrayal of the man she had trusted for nearly 2 decades. She couldn't even cry. Her tears were trapped somewhere deep inside her, frozen in disbelief. In the weeks that followed, she found herself replaying their entire marriage in her mind, searching for signs she had missed. But there was no solace in looking back, only the bitter reality that the man she had fought for, the man she thought she would grow old with, had chosen someone else while she fought for her life. Sharon didn't confront Solomon immediately. She knew she didn't have the strength to face him in her current state, both physically and emotionally. Instead, she buried the discovery deep within herself, choosing to observe him closely over the next few days. She watched how easily he lied, how smoothly he went about his daily life, coming home late, sometimes smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. He kissed her forehead out of obligation, but Sharon knew his heart wasn't in it. It hadn't been for a long time. The rage that built inside of Sharon was slow, but it was fierce. She had once been weak, but now, with each passing day, her anger gave her strength. The betrayal fueled her, gave her a purpose. She realized that Solomon's infidelity had stripped away the last shred of compassion she had left for him. While her body had been fighting the cancer, her soul was now consumed with a desire for revenge. The man she had devoted her life to, the father of her children, had abandoned her when she needed him the most. She wouldn't let him walk away unscathed. In her quiet moments, Sharon began to plan. She knew confronting Solomon head-on wouldn't be enough. No, she wanted to destroy him in the way he had destroyed her, methodically, piece by piece. Sharon started by researching ways to financially ruin him. She knew the first step would be to cut him off from their joint accounts, and so she began making small withdrawals, moving the money into a private account he wouldn't know about. With each transaction, she felt a small victory, a sense of control returning to her life. But Sharon wasn't content with just taking his money. She needed to break him in every way possible, emotionally and professionally. She learned that Mandy was a client of Solomon's company, and she knew this could be the key to his undoing. Sharon began gathering evidence, slowly piecing together the affair, and making plans to anonymously leak it to his company. If she played her cards right, not only would Solomon lose his wife, but he would also lose his career. As Sharon's strength slowly returned after her final round of chemotherapy, so did her resolve. The cancer had taken its toll on her, but it had also transformed her. She was no longer the woman who had once relied on Solomon for comfort and support. She was now a woman scorned, filled with a quiet determination to take back everything he had stolen from her. By the spring of 2009, Sharon Michaels had transformed from the woman who quietly suffered in her sickness to someone who had regained control over her life. Her husband's affair with Mandy, their younger neighbor, had not only shattered her emotionally, but ignited a fire within her. Weeks of planning had gone into what would be the perfect revenge, something that would strip Solomon of everything he valued, from his career to his reputation, and ultimately, his life. It started on April 15th, 2009, when Sharon made her first anonymous call to Solomon's company. She had carefully prepared herself for the conversation, rehearsing what she would say without giving herself away. The HR department listened as she voiced concerns about Solomon's inappropriate relationship with a client, Mandy. Sharon did not need to provide all the details. just enough to make them suspicious. A few carefully chosen words were enough to plant doubt in their minds. The conversation was brief, but effective. Sharon knew that once the seed was planted, it would only be a matter of time before Solomon's professional world began to unravel. The days that followed were filled with small, calculated steps. Sharon continued her secret withdrawals from their joint bank accounts, moving money into her private savings. Every transaction gave her a sense of empowerment. Each dollar she moved represented another piece of Solomon's life slipping away from him, and he didn't even know it. By the end of April, Sharon had drained nearly half of their savings. She could feel the weight of her plan coming together, piece by piece, like the slow turn of a wheel, moving toward an inevitable end. Then came the night of May 2nd, 2009, the night when Sharon's plan would reach its final act. She had spent that day in quiet preparation, going over every detail in her mind. The house was spotless, the table set with their best dinnerware. Sharon had gone to the effort of making Solomon's favorite meal, something she hadn't done in months, not since her health had taken such a drastic turn. She acted like the wife she had once been, loving, attentive, making Solomon believe she wanted to rekindle what had been lost between them. That night, Solomon came home late, as he often did. The guilt from his affair with Mandy had been building, especially in recent weeks, as his work began investigating rumors of misconduct. He didn't know Sharon had been the one to set those wheels in motion, but he could feel the pressure mounting from every side. His defenses were down, and when Sharon suggested they sit down to dinner, he was relieved. Maybe things between them could go back to normal. They talked over dinner, but it wasn't the same as it used to be. Sharon's words were soft, her tone calm, as she asked about his day and their children. Solomon, still unaware of the danger looming over him, responded with quiet guilt, trying to mask the shame he felt. He thought maybe this was a second chance, a way to make things right. He didn't see the way Sharon's eyes stayed fixed on him, how she measured every movement, waiting for the right moment. After dinner, Sharon suggested they share a drink, a simple gesture of peace between them. She had prepared it carefully, slipping a sedative into Solomon's glass when he wasn't looking. They sat together in silence, the atmosphere heavy with the tension neither spoke about. Sharon watched as the sedative took effect, slowly relaxing Solomon's body until he slumped forward, unconscious. With Solomon now helpless, Sharon's heart didn't race. There was no panic or hesitation. She moved calmly through the house, retrieving the hammer she had taken from the garage earlier that day. The weight of it in her hand felt natural, as though it belonged there. She returned to the kitchen, standing over Solomon's unconscious body, staring down at the man who had betrayed her when she needed him the most. The first blow landed with a sickening thud, and Sharon felt no remorse as the hammer struck Solomon's head. The sound echoed through the kitchen, but she didn't flinch. The blood splattered across the floor, staining the pristine tiles she had cleaned earlier. She struck him again and again, until there was nothing left of the man who had once been her husband. Blood pooled beneath his lifeless body, a macabre reflection of their broken marriage. For a moment, Sharon stood there, breathing heavily, her grip on the hammer firm. The satisfaction of completing her plan washed over her. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even sad. She felt nothing. The hammer fell from her hand, landing beside Solomon's body with a soft clink as it hit the floor. Sharon looked down at him, but he no longer seemed real. He was just a man who had wronged her, and now he was gone. The next morning, May 3rd, 2009, Sharon called 911 with the same calmness she had used throughout the entire ordeal. She told the operator she had found Solomon unresponsive in the kitchen. Her voice was steady as she explained that he must have fallen during the night and hit his head. Within minutes, the police arrived, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet street where nothing like this had ever happened before. The officers quickly entered the house, and it didn't take long for them to notice something was off. The blood spatter across the kitchen didn't match Sharon's story of a simple fall, and the force of the wounds was far too severe. Solomon's head injuries were immediately suspicious, and the detectives took note of Sharon's calm demeanor. There was no panic in her, no grief for her husband, only a quiet resolve that made the investigators uneasy. On May 6, 2009, the investigation took a sharp turn when detectives discovered the hammer used in the attack. It had been hidden in Sharon's closet, still stained with blood. The police also uncovered records of the financial withdrawals she had made over the past few months, signaling clear premeditation. The evidence was overwhelming, and by May 20th, Sharon was formally arrested for Solomon's murder. During her interrogation, Sharon remained calm, even as the detectives presented the damning evidence. She listened quietly as they explained how they had pieced together the events of that night, how every detail pointed back to her. There was no denial, no desperate attempt to cover her tracks. Sharon simply sat, unshaken, knowing that this was the final act in her long, calculated plan. Her fate was sealed, just as Solomon's had been. The murder had been brutal, but in Sharon's mind, it had been necessary. By the time Sharon Michaels' trial began in November 2009, her story had captivated the entire nation. The image of a woman who had battled cancer only to fall into a pit of despair and murder made headlines in every major newspaper. Journalists followed every twist of the case, each detail more shocking than the last. The quiet streets of Raleigh, North Carolina, where the Michaels family had once lived a seemingly perfect life, were now swarmed with reporters. Sharon, once a loving wife and mother, was now on trial for murder, her face plastered across televisions and newspapers alike. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. Every seat was filled with people eager to witness the trial of a woman who had once been seen as a victim of circumstance, but was now accused of a heinous crime. The prosecution wasted no time in painting Sharon as a cold-blooded killer. They outlined how she had meticulously planned Solomon's murder, citing the months she spent transferring funds into her own account and the hammer hidden in her closet as proof of premeditation. Sharon's calm demeanor during her interrogation was brought up repeatedly. She had shown no remorse, they argued, because this was exactly what she had wanted all along. The prosecutors leaned heavily into the narrative of Sharon being calculating and dangerous. They detailed how, in the weeks leading up to Solomon's murder, she had methodically dismantled his life without him even knowing. The anonymous tip to Solomon's HR department about his affair with Mandy had been a strategic move, not a desperate one. Sharon had wanted to destroy Solomon in every possible way, starting with his career, then his finances, and finally, his life. The prosecution painted the picture of a woman who had used her illness as a mask to hide her true intentions, waiting until the moment was right to strike. Sharon sat in the courtroom, listening to the accusations, with the same quiet resolve that had carried her through her battle with cancer. To the spectators, she seemed almost detached, as though the words being spoken about her were describing someone else. But inside, she was simply exhausted. The months of planning, the murder, the arrest, it had drained her of any emotion. She didn't argue with the prosecution's version of events because, in a way, it was true. She had planned it all. But what they failed to understand was the depth of the pain she had endured. Sharon had been pushed to the edge, and when she looked over that edge, she had seen no other way out. The defense, on the other hand, presented a very different Sharon to the jury. They spoke about her illness, her fight against cancer, and the immense physical and emotional toll it had taken on her. They argued that Sharon had been a victim, first of her disease, and then of her husband's betrayal. The affair between Solomon and Mandy was revealed in painstaking detail, shocking the courtroom and shifting public opinion. For months, Sharon had suffered in silence, battling not only her cancer, but the knowledge that the man she loved had abandoned her for someone else during her most vulnerable time. The defense team highlighted the emotional strain that Sharon had been under, arguing that it had driven her to a point of temporary insanity. They acknowledged that Sharon had planned Solomon's murder, but insisted that it had been a decision born out of desperation, not malice. They described her as a woman who had been pushed too far, her body weakened by illness and her spirit broken by betrayal. The defense wanted the jury to see Sharon not as a killer, but as a woman who had lost everything: her health, her dignity, and her marriage. As more details of Solomon's affair came to light, the courtroom became divided. There were those who sympathized with Sharon, believing she had been driven to the brink by forces beyond her control. They saw her as a woman who had been pushed too far, a victim of both her illness and her husband's selfishness. But others saw her as dangerous. The fact that she had spent months planning Solomon's death showed in their eyes that she was fully aware of what she was doing. They believed Sharon had allowed her rage to fester, turning her into a woman capable of murder. To them, she was not a victim, but a threat. The jury's decision would be a difficult one, as both sides had presented compelling arguments. They deliberated for weeks, weighing Sharon's battle with cancer against her carefully executed crime. The public waited anxiously for the verdict, with news outlets broadcasting daily updates on the trial. On December 15, 2009, the jury finally reached its decision. Sharon Michaels was convicted of second-degree murder. The jury believed that while her actions were premeditated, her mental state had been severely compromised by her illness. They did not see her as a heartless killer, but as someone who had snapped under immense pressure. Her sentence was 25 years to life in prison, a harsh but fitting punishment for a crime that had shocked everyone. As the verdict was read, Sharon showed little reaction. She had expected this outcome. In many ways, she felt that her punishment had begun long before the trial. The cancer had taken her body. Solomon's betrayal had taken her heart. And now the legal system had taken her freedom. But in the end, Sharon was at peace with what she had done. She had taken back the control she had lost, even if it meant losing her own life in the process. The trial ended, but the story of Sharon Michaels lingered. Some saw her as a symbol of the tragic consequences of betrayal and illness, while others saw her as a warning of the darkness that can lie beneath even the most outwardly perfect lives. For Sharon, there was no turning back. The life she had once known was over, and the only thing left for her was the memory of the woman she used to be, the woman who had loved and lost everything. Sharon's story is a haunting reminder of how betrayal, combined with physical and emotional pain, can drive someone to commit unthinkable acts. While the court had delivered its verdict, the true punishment was that Sharon would live the rest of her life knowing she had become a killer, forever stained by the blood of the man she once loved. We have so many strange cases on our channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out this case where a doctor's secret affair with 3 young women ends in obsession and murder. See you in the next video.